Okay. All right.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Here we are, meeting 4 of 5 scheduled. As I was just mentioning, I was trying to think of something to quickly go around the table with the commissioners by way of introduction on thinking about the last year or so of the COVID pandemic. What was something that was particularly challenging for you? And then also on the bright side, was there a silver lining for you of having gone through this experience, either in something that you learned or something you didn't have to do that you would have otherwise had to do, or something like that? So I'm not sure who would be willing to go first, but we can just go around to the 6. That would be great. And then we'll introduce the rest of the folks from the departments. I'm going to call on Commissioner Schmoker since he got to lead the charge.
Okay, so let's see, something that was challenging. Actually, I don't know what was challenging. I don't know. I mean, remembering my mask sometimes. I'd get halfway to the store, or sometimes in the store, and remember I didn't have my mask. Something that that was good is that, of course, everybody wearing masks. Hardly anybody got the flu this year, so it was good.
That was a bonus.
Yeah.
Definitely. Commissioner Flath, you want to go next?
Sure. I think one of the good things was the idea, like Jim said, about not getting the flu. One of the things I found hard to do once we were getting able to get back and meeting together was to preach with a mask.
Oh,
Preach to my congregation with a mask.
That's a challenge. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Commissioner Merritt.
I would say, at least from a work standpoint, wearing a mask while you're trying to actually do physical activity is it makes, just makes it much more difficult. And I'd say there's no silver lining at all. No, I'm just kidding. I can't think of a silver lining yet. I don't think we're totally past it yet. So, but yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Councilmember Bader, how about you?
Yeah, I guess challenging part would have been technology, but on the other side of that, it was nice being able to attend a lot of meetings with a short, 1-minute commute to my spare bedroom. So
I liked that part as well. Yeah. Councilmember Stonecipher.
Yeah, I thought what was challenging for me was just sort of the lack of social interaction, being in the room with people and getting together with people. It's not quite the same on Zoom. Yeah. The silver lining for me was at certain times over the past year, each of my adult children came home for a stint because where they were living was not conducive to them working from home. So that was, I enjoyed getting a chance. You don't always get to live with your adult children. It has its good and bad points, but it was mostly good.
It's good that you can say that too.
Yeah.
Mayor Franklin.
Yeah, I think just leading during a global pandemic. I don't think anything has ever tested my leadership more. Having to make decisions quickly, to prioritize public safety, and also leading when I'm not really in charge, where you got the health district, you got the county, you got the governor's office, but the community looks to mayors to solve problems. So I think the pressure that I experienced this past year was unprecedented for me. I think silver lining is, we have an incredibly competent team, and I honestly, I've never been more grateful for Chief DeMarco. Because I had someone that I trusted so much, and so really learning to lean on others because no one can do this type of work when it's that challenging and complex alone. And so really leaning on the team around you and the collaboration, not only here within the city, but across the county and the region and the state, I think has kept us safe. So I'll say that silver lining.
Great, thank you. Chiefs, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe go side by side on the staff introductions? And if you guys want to chime in on the roundtable question, feel free. But not if you don't want to.
I'll just throw out a silver lining for those that couldn't come up with any. But we learned a lot this year, and I think profoundly thankful as I worked on the annual report this afternoon that we were able to continue to provide service and that we haven't had a serious case of illness in our workforce or within the families of our workforce. And so all of that work that we did this last year was not in vain. That while there were certainly bumps along the way, that we kept everybody safe and that we were able to continue to serve the community while we were taking those steps. So very grateful for that.
That's remarkable that you didn't have any serious illnesses because you have a big workforce. That's impressive. Chief Waller.
Staff introductions, is that what we were doing, or?
Your self-introductions.
Okay.
And if you want to respond to the question, you can, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
And then we'll go to the rest of the staff.
Still Chief Waller of District 4, I hope. I think the challenge for me was beginning a leadership in a new organization that I was new at during the middle of COVID. Kind of like Mayor Franklin, it's a little challenging to take over when you can't meet people or have meetings or talk with people. But the silver lining is the organization and the commissioners had faith, and we've made it through again without many illnesses at all and no serious illnesses.
Thank you. So maybe we'll go to other folks from District 4 now. Whitney, and we have a new person here with us today that I noticed, Josh, and I don't know which agency he is with. So Whitney, go ahead.
Whitney Mansfield, District 4, President of Local 2694. I'm a lieutenant with the fire department.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from District 4 here?
Christine should be on, and Battalion Chief Bill Shearer.
Yes, okay. Christine Heike here, and I'm an office assistant in District 4.
Hey, Christine. And Bill?
Bill Shearer, District 4. I'm a battalion chief, and I manage most of the IT issues.
All righty. Let's go over to the Everett side of things here. Probably Curtis and Mike and the rest of y'all.
Curtis Brown, Fire Marshal for the City of Everett.
Thanks.
I'm Mike Calvert. I'm the Assistant Chief of Operations for Everett.
Okay. And it's Jason, not Josh. Sorry, Jason Brock.
You missed one of the assistant chiefs.
Oh, is he? Yeah, Rich is on.
Rich is here today.
We got to
go ahead, Jason.
I was doing alphabetical.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be here. Jason Brock. I'm a captain at the Everett Fire Department and also the secretary for Local 46.
Got it. Thank you. And back to Rich.
Hi, I'm Rich Llewellyn, Assistant Chief of Administration with Everett Fire.
Okay, and Matt.
I'm Matt Mueller, Administrative Assistant for Everett Fire.
I think that's everybody. Did we miss anyone? Okie doke. Well, we'll go on here. So today's meeting, as you can tell from just scanning the agendas, mostly it's their deeper dive on some of the finance issues and the funding options and looking ahead, what might we expect and what do we not know the answer to yet. And this is not nearly as deep a dive as we will end up going into if you decide to proceed. There's a lot more work to be done here, but I think it's a good casting of some of our options here that the chiefs have put together. So I'm looking forward to your questions there. Before we go further, I just want to say when I come to the end of this meeting, since next week is our last of 5 meetings in this exploratory phase, what I'm going to ask you at the end of this meeting is there anything you haven't heard or information you haven't received from us that you need in order to feel comfortable making a decision at our next meeting about whether you would like to recommend proceeding beyond this exploratory phase? we'll sort of need to know the answer to that today or Monday at the latest, so that we can get that information for you and have it available for you next Friday to take a look at. So think about that as the wheels are grinding today, as you hear from the chiefs. I'm hoping we can think about that. We've approved the meeting summary. District 4 has the other more generic version with the same ingredients is behind that. And I don't know if it has the being typo, but it does reflect that Llewellyn was not here. So if are there any corrections or edits from the Everett side of folks on the meeting summary? Or does it look generally okay to you all? And the thumbs up thing. All right. You okay? Brenda, you weren't here, so hard perhaps to, or until the end, so hard to comment on the first part of it. So, okay. We'll go on beyond that. The communications update, I checked in with the chiefs before the meeting, and there have been no emails submitted by anybody out there to the email addresses listed on both of the websites. So there's nothing to report there. And with that, I will turn it over to the chiefs for the finance presentation.
Okay, give me 1 second to bring it up. All right, nothing like talking to your own screen while people are watching. So to date, first 3 meetings, we've mentioned several times that we know the material presented is fairly simple. And the point of those meetings was to illustrate that the functions of a fire department are very similar, and that it's really just a matter of scale between the different organizations in the community. Those meetings were intended to lead to this meeting, which is intended to be a very broad view prepared by fire chiefs, not finance professionals, of what financial impact or financial options exists with the contemplation of a merger. And so first we're going to talk through what funding mechanisms are available to a fire authority. And they're very similar to a fire district, so more familiar possibly to the Fire District 4 commissioners than to the city representatives, but fire authorities are funded with 2 tools. They have property tax levies available to them, and they have benefits charges available to them. And both of those, the foundations of those systems exist in RCW. So we'll talk first about property tax levies. In a typical fire authority or fire district, there are 2 levies typically in place, levied against the assessed valuation of property, improved property within the bounds of the jurisdiction. And there's a fire protection levy, and there's an emergency medical services levy, or EMS levy. And here's an illustration, and in all of the upcoming slides, where there are numbers involved. When we put a chart up above, the little table below is the basis for the chart. So the chart and the table are depicting the same thing. And that'll be a theme that runs through this. But what you're looking at here is, in the red on the right, is the statutory maximum set in RCW for both of the 2 funding levies available to a fire district or a fire authority. So 50 cents per thousand is the most that a district can charge for an EMS levy, and $1.50 per thousand is the most they can charge for fire protection levy. And then again, a theme that's been in all the slideshows and is going to be a theme in this one is that the Everett numbers will appear in green in this show, and the Fire District 4 numbers will appear in blue. And so we know Fire District 4 is already a fire district, and we know their levy rates exactly. We know that they're charging 47 cents per thousand for an EMS levy currently, and that they're at $1.46 per thousand for their fire levy. Everett does have an EMS levy, and our EMS levy is currently 45 cents per thousand, and we've had to use the city's finance department to prepare an estimate of what a fire levy would have to be in order to fund the Everett Fire Department as we know it today. And so that estimate is the $1.30 that you see on the left. And so just remember that Everett actually collects a property tax levy and pays for general fund services across a wide range of departments, and that $1.30 is not exactly a perfect representation, but it is as close as we can come for the comparison to a fire district. The next tool that's available is something that's called a benefits charge, and that is a fee, not a tax, that is collected typically by the county on behalf of the jurisdiction based on a formula. And one of the things that's not included in this presentation that would come from a deeper dive is what are the variables of the formula and how would the formula be applied. But what I can give you is the basis in RCW, and I'm not going to quote from RCW here. I just want you to be aware that in your packet are the references to RCW and where this information comes from. But in the event that a fire authority chooses to charge a benefits charge, the fire levy, which is typically statutorily set as a cap of $1.50 per thousand, is reduced by 50 cents to $1 per thousand. And then the fire district or fire authority can collect up to 60% of its operating budget from a benefits charge. So in order to be able to do this presentation, we've had to make a bunch of assumptions that we realize that in the end do not lie with the fire chiefs, that they lie with the elected officials. But in the case of the upcoming simulations, we're assuming that the benefits charge, when we talk about the benefits charge model, will be paying for 40% of the operating cost of the proposed jurisdiction. There are other revenue. Sorry, go ahead.
I just jump in just so there's not confusion when the people look at the RCWs. The $1.50 actually comes from 3 separate 50-cent taxes, and so one of those gets taken away when the benefits charge comes in.
Thank you. Anybody have questions about benefits charge or levy rates before I go any further? Okay, so much smaller in scale, but available to fire departments are a few other, revenue and reimbursements that must be considered. And so currently, and again, green is Everett and blue is Fire District 4. We used 2020 revenues. Those were known revenues for both jurisdictions. Both jurisdictions have fees for transport to medical facilities, and that's on the left. And both receive, submit for and receive reimbursement from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services for the transport of Medicaid patients to the hospital. And those dollars are generally abbreviated GEMT, or Ground Emergency Medical Transport dollars. And those come in the form of checks and reimbursement to the cost of taking those patients to the hospital. And so they are a significant amount of money. And then also not contemplated in this presentation, but which would have to be part of a future, more detailed look at the finances of a proposed merger, is exactly how we're going to deliver fire marshal services. And there's just certainly we know we will provide fire marshal services. The question is do you contract for the billing? Do you let the city of Everett do the billing? There's a lot of questions there, but the bottom line is that there's revenue associated with that work also, and that is left out of this presentation. So those, I just want to leave that asterisk hanging so that you're aware that there is still some questions that have to be answered. So there's a few things.
This is Commissioner Flath.
Yep, go ahead.
Yes, I had a question. Did you at one time or someone from Everett indicate that there was some private ambulance service as well?
Yep, Everett Fire uses a private ambulance service to transport some of our basic life support transports to the hospital. And that contract is kind of at the will of the city. So we have the ability to end that contract at any time. Okay. For the time being, we continue to use that, but as part of this discussion, if we choose to go forward, we can also have the conversation about the proposed jurisdiction taking over BLS transporting, and we will not run into any problems with the contract that we have for ambulance service.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So there's a few things that we know about the organizations. We can go to the assessor's office and we can look at the assessed value in 2021 of both jurisdictions and add them together, and that's what this chart is. So it shows the relative size of AV across both jurisdictions. And we can also go to our 2021 budgets and add up the labor, the maintenance and operation expenses, we know an exact figure for Fire District 4 on how much they spend out of their capital funds on an annual basis. And we've worked with Susie in our finance department to put a dollar placeholder in our expenses there as well. So we can approximate that the annual cost or operating budget of a proposed merger would be in the vicinity of $49.7 million. And so that would be the target as we start to build simulations around how much money do we need to raise to operate this proposed merger. Is that would be the target on a year-to-year basis to be able to operate an organization. So that leads us into the what-if scenarios, and we've just created 2 of them. And as part of the what-if scenarios, we have to, in addition to an operating budget, we have to account for the future cost of capital replacements. And fire departments operate, and there's a little small list of the large capital items that a fire department operates. Obviously, we have fire apparatus, which is the fire engines and the ladder trucks and so on. And they have a fixed life cycle and they eventually wear out and we have to buy replacements. And they're very expensive. A fire engine today is about $600,000 and a ladder truck is almost $1.6 million. We have a fleet of ambulances in both jurisdictions. Ambulances are less expensive. They're currently about $250,000 a piece, but they get a lot of use and are lighter duty, so they're replaced more often. We have other staff vehicles, other types of rescue vehicles, and they have various life cycles. And then we have fixed facilities. And I just list fire stations, but obviously both jurisdictions manage a few other buildings besides the fire stations. And those typically are planned for replacement in the 50-plus year life cycle range. And then we have a wide range of very expensive, operating a fire department is very expensive. We have a wide range of depreciating assets, including things like the backpacks that we wear with air in them. Those are very, very expensive to own, very expensive to buy, and very expensive to replace. And so you have to sort of build a plan around replacing those in the future. And so for the purposes of the upcoming simulations, we have $5 million annually set aside. Fire District 4 currently already sets aside $1.7 million annually, and in talking with Susie at Everett, our finance director, she feels very comfortable that the difference between 1.7 and 5 would more than adequately fund the future capital needs of this proposed merger, but we use the round figure for a placeholder and shoot high and hope to come in less expensive. So the first scenario is one option that's available to you, and that is to fund the proposed organization just with the 2 property tax levies, an EMS levy and a fire levy. And so the simulation that's coming up takes the 2021 expense budget, subtracts out the revenues, adds in the $5 million capital set aside, and assumes no additional employees. And here's another place where an asterisk comes in. We're aware that the new organization would require some additional administrative capabilities, for example, human resources, IT, finance, etc. But we have designed these models to be more expensive than we expect them to be. And so even though those functions will be needed, we believe that on a deeper dive with the assistance of a finance professional, that we would be able to include those needs and not come in higher than the upcoming model. So here's the first what-if scenario. In the top line there, we know the annual operating need is $49.7 million. We know we would need to set aside $5 million for future capital replacements, and we can subtract out the $6 million and some change in revenue that we received in the year before. And that means that we're targeting the generation of $48.3 million via 2 property tax levies, which when you do the math, and I know it's very difficult to do the math or to talk about math in a PowerPoint. If we were all meeting in person, it's even harder when we're doing it online. But here we have done the math and can tell you that the existing levy rate in Everett for EMS at 45 cents a thousand would work in both cases, and that we would need to set a general fire levy rate of $1.37 to raise $48.5 million, which would cover the operating expense. So that is scenario number one. Number one produces $1.37 a thousand, slightly more than the estimate for what the city of Everett is currently charging or paying, and slightly less than what Fire District 4 is currently charging and paying. Scenario number two is the incorporation of the concept of a benefits charge. So here is a merged organization that still has a fire levy, an EMS levy, and a benefits charge that reduces the levy on the fire side. So here again, we use the combined 2021 assessed valuation. We use the 2021 expense budget minus the 2020 revenues. We set aside $5 million for capital replacements. Again, we've added no employees, and in this case, we've included a benefits charge that funds 40% of the operating budget. So what if scenario number two is similar? The annual expense budget is the same, $49 million in, $5 million set aside, minus the $6 million in revenue, produces the exact same funding required in scenario number one. But in this case, with the benefits charge in place, we can reduce the EMS levy to 35 cents per thousand in both jurisdictions, and we can reduce the fire levies to 70 cents per thousand, and instead charge a benefits charge of 40% of the total budget to still raise $49.8 million. So I'm sure there'll be questions about this. I just want to put it up graphically. These are the revenues depicted in a graph from both scenarios. On the left is just the two levies and all of the dollars generated by property tax levies. And on the same scale on the right are all of the dollars generated with property tax levies and a benefits charge to produce the same outcome. And these are the principal paths that elected leadership would have to choose from if you choose to go forward. And both obviously have differing impacts on our citizens and on our businesses and on our communities. But when the mayor asked what is the scenario that produces the same or better services in our communities, I think we can very confidently say that in Everett we would have the same or better, certainly better future planning in Everett, and that in the case of Fire District 4, as we've illustrated in other meetings, that there would be additional services at hopefully the same or lower cost. So there's a lot of pieces missing from these simulations. And there are a lot of assumptions that Chief Waller and I had to make that are actually your responsibility, not ours. I believe that if you choose to go forward, that we can find answers to all of these. We would need to actually decide together as a group on levy rates. We would need to decide together as a group if we wanted to include a benefits charge or if we did not want to include a benefits charge. We would need to take a deeper dive into the benefits charge itself, because the benefits charge is based on a formula that you also have to build. We can certainly look at other people's formulas, but you have the freedom and authority to design your own benefits charge so that it's charged equally and fairly in our communities. We have to contemplate as a group how, if we choose to form a new entity that doesn't actually take property tax collection until mid-year, how do we fund January through the first property tax collection? So there's an issue of reserves that we'll have to work through. I mentioned previously that we would have to contemplate exactly how we were going to deliver and charge for and collect upon fire marshal services. This group would also have to decide what fees and service charges that they wanted to include, if any of the existing fees are the fees we want to carry forward, if you wanted to change them. Ultimately, you would have the authority and responsibility to decide on exact organizational charts, numbers of personnel, and then the capital replacement planning. Obviously, we talked a little bit about that, but we would actually need a detailed capital replacement plan. On the City of Everett side, there's an enormous future liability for Left One fire employees from our past. It is possible to hand that authority But again, we would have to produce the plan that manages the funding of that authority over to the new fire authority, or would the city of Everett choose to retain it? All of that would need to be discussed and mapped out mathematically and then decided upon. And then ultimately you would choose the final overall budget plan, which in the case of this committee would then decide if it's an agreeable plan. And in the city of Everett's case, we would have to then go back to the full city of Everett council and get their endorsement and approval, and ultimately place a plan in front of the voters for approval. All of these details come out of a final fire authority plan, several of which other jurisdictions are included in your binders if you wanted to see a finished plan. In our case, we have generalized the finance of the proposed merger. But to be able to get to the level of detail, down to the single family homeowner, down to the individual business, and to actually have enough information to make a final decision on, we would have to agree to have more meetings, and we would have to bring in a finance professional. And for the folks that know him, Bill Cushman, former finance director for the city of Everett, he offers this service. He's provided this service across the state. And is available to do that work for this committee if you choose. And that is it in a nutshell. And I'm happy to go back to other slides. I realize that we've just covered an enormously complex topic in a very short period of time. We're happy to take your questions, your comments, or to go back and review slides in detail if that's what you'd like to do.
That's a lot of finance stuff. So this is, if folks have anything they want to revisit here or questions that are raised by what you saw there, I think there are certainly additional scenarios, but the biggest delta is what happens if you include a benefit charge, and you can see it dramatically impacts your tax rates. Commissioner Schmoker.
So, Chief, how many Left One members approximately does Everett have hanging out there?
That's a good question that I don't have the answer for right now. I'd have to ask. There are
like 550, 500.
It's not 500. I would say we're under 100.
Okay.
Remaining Left One employees. It's a mix of police and fire, so we would have to extract out the fire and do the math on how many of them were former fire employees.
Right.
I'll have an answer for you next week.
And the city has set aside a chunk of money and continues to set aside money for that liability each year, but it is not yet fully funded, as I understand it.
Yeah, that's correct. They've actually pre-funded it, so they are out in front of the actuarial table on making payment on that future expense, but it is not yet fully funded.
Thank you.
Other questions, or if there's no questions, any comments on what you saw? No.
So I didn't see anything. Nope, go ahead.
My comment is just that the benefits charge is very attractive, and I know that these numbers weren't actual numbers and that we would need a lot more research and data, but it is attractive because I think it provides stability to the fire services and puts the money where where a lot of the demand is, the revenue that is being collected, and it doesn't put it all on our individual residents and families. And so I like that scenario, and I know that's harder to move through, but that was an interesting scenario to see.
I agree with that.
Anyone else on questions here?
You should give Chief Waller. Do you have anything you'd like to add to my?
Go ahead, Chief.
No, I think you and I spent enough time on this that you covered everything that we've talked about for the last week.
Yeah. And I guess I want to talk a little bit out in the open about comments that they've heard over the time. So Everett is in the news locally for the structural budget deficit that they face, and it's a real problem. these meetings are part of that problem, and part of the potential solution. But one of the comments that comes up over and over again is the worry that somehow this proposed merger causes the city of Everett to lean on the residents or the taxpayers in Snohomish. And hopefully this presentation sort of helps everyone in the meeting and the community understand that there is enough tax assessed valuation in both communities under either scenario to run the proposed organization fairly and equitably, that nobody is depending on any, there's no subsidy flowing in either direction, so to speak. And there's also one of the other concerns is we're aware that Fire District 4 has money set aside to replace fire stations. There is no intent or desire on anyone's part to use those funds for anything other than that purpose. That there's a variety of ways that we can handle that, including putting those funds in trust, and that we all understand that if we choose to do something new together, that doesn't discredit or discount the work that you've done in preparation for your own future, and that it's very easy to memorialize that need while also planning together to sort of solve all of our joint problems going forward. So I just feel like I've heard those things often enough in the background that it's worth mentioning out in the open.
I appreciate that. I think my opinion is, my own personal opinion for what it's worth, is that there are probably dozens and dozens of issues like that we will have to solve if we choose to go forward. I don't think they're insurmountable. At least not yet.
Are there anything else folks have heard out there in their rumor mill, positive or negative, that you wanted to ask about here in the context of this financing discussion, in terms of how this would turn out for folks that are currently in your respective jurisdictions? And the Chief's mentioned a few about Everett subsidy. Are you having other questions? Have you heard about people being worried about this for some reason, or that you've discussed yourselves?
I've had a few people ask about it, not any specific questions, just, gee, I hear we're talking about, I've heard it a couple different ways, but, about the merger. And I've just told them that we're in preliminary talks and we're looking to see if it makes sense for both of us. And I haven't heard the specific issues that Chief DeMarco was mentioning yet.
I think our residents and community, I mean, most times people are worried about, is this going to cost us more? And so I think what we saw in both of those scenarios is that District 4 residents, it doesn't cost more. It actually could possibly cost a lot less, which should be good news for the residents. And then for Everett residents, what I saw in those two, and I know, again, this is just very high level and we would need the full analysis, but I saw one scenario where it does cost a little bit more, and I saw one scenario where it could cost less. And I think that comfort is letting our residents and community know that we are trying to explore options that are very cost effective for you as residents as well, but where we protect fire services and ensure that the services are there. So I liked seeing options and seeing that those options not have such a negative impact on our communities that it wasn't insurmountable. So
great, thanks. Other thoughts or questions that have come to mind as you've watched the presentation today, or the ones in the prior meetings? No? Scott?
Well, I appreciated all the financial information. And we've kind of seen this on the Everett side. We've looked at this at a very high level before, so I was not too surprised by that. I think from my perspective, I think there's a small group of our community that wonders why we would do this. Why are we going through this process if it's not going to cost us any more and the service will be the same? Why would we do that? So I think we need to think about the messaging of the advantages. And obviously, a big advantage is if we can do the fire benefit charge, so that it does change the tax burden for homeowners, who will primarily be those who would approve this measure.
I think it's worth noting in this meeting, thoughts that I've had about this over the years. I worry about the 60% margin that is required to pass, and then watched with great interest the benefits charge proposed by South County Fire in South Snohomish County. And with a passage rate of over 70% of their electorate, that has sort of changed my opinion of what level of support we might find in the community if we do a good job of messaging and explaining exactly how this works, because this is not simple civics. There's some complexity here, and we have to find a simple way to demonstrate the advantages of that to our communities.
I agree, and I don't think it's, again, to use that word, insurmountable. And I think I'm guessing if we do a proper job between now and deciding whether we move forward to the next stage, and then as we work through problems, issues, as we develop that messaging, develop what the organization will look like, and develop what the budget will look like a little closer, I think I think the messaging will kind of develop itself, and I have confidence that we will, if it makes sense, we can convince the public that it makes sense, and I think we will get similar support.
And I think that's been the hardest thing to answer questions and to develop a message, because the answers to the questions and the answers to the message depends on what you all decide. You will have so many options and so many decision points in the actual plan, until you get a good majority through that plan. We can't answer most of the communities and most of the membership and the employees' questions, and we can't develop a message because there's just too many ways to go.
Too many, yes, too many unknowns.
That's a good point.
But what I've seen so far, I'm pretty happy with the direction.
Good. Thanks. Commissioner Merritt, any questions or comments from you on what you've seen today or so far?
No, I don't really have any questions or comments.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Lot to take in.
Yes, it is.
On the finance side.
Yeah. Commissioner Flatt?
I was sort of wondering if there's any folks out there who would take a benefit charge and maybe had 40%. Is there any folks who that would fall on who might be more opposed to something like this? I don't know who that would be, but are there?
It's hard to speculate at this point, but there was no formal opposition, no funded formal opposition to the benefits charge effort in South Snohomish County, which I think speaks somewhat to your question.
Okay.
So Brenda could probably answer this, but the general rule of thumb of the people that I know that have a benefits charge in higher areas, obviously the money still comes the same amount, but the homeowners get less and the businesses get more, and people will say, well, why do the businesses not balk? I think tax incentive wise and whatever, if you own a $1 million house and a $1 million business and you're gonna have to pay money, it would be better to pay it on the $1 million business and not the $1 million house. And so I think that's where it kind of comes down to, is the same people are generally saying the same money. It's just which bucket they put it in, and accounting wise, it's better to put it in the business bucket, and therefore you don't get a lot of pushback. Is that generally?
I mean, I don't. I'm not sure. I would be curious to hear what the business pushback has been in other communities, if there has been any. I mean, I think it's just hard. It's harder for the business community to have a concerted effort. I mean, it's more disparate, so it's harder for them to kind of come together, where I think, obviously the people, your voters and neighborhoods, they can start, they can organize themselves, I think, a little bit more effectively. But I think it would be important for us to think about outreach to the business community and talking to them about the need. I mean, from a very philosophical level, it seems fair that those who are placing the greatest risk for fire and emergency response should pay, the greater share of the cost of it. And I don't know that all business owners would agree with that, but I certainly that's how I feel about this. I mean, I think the cost burden of taxation should be borne by those who are getting the services, and not and to the extent that we can do that. You don't always get a chance to do that, but I think that there's a real philosophical argument to be made for a fire benefit charge, because again, the people who are placing the most risk into the system would be paying the greatest. But we have to communicate that, obviously, if we go down that road.
I have been involved in 2 benefit charge campaigns in the past, and connecting with the Chamber of Commerce was very important in both of them. People that own multifamily properties may go like, well, really? But the equity argument does loom pretty large. But for these larger, riskier businesses, we wouldn't need a lot of the equipment that we have. And that typically has resonated, as has the ability to parse out what it means for the average voter. And the average voter is generally going to be somebody in a single family home. And when you're able to put on the benefit charge, they end up usually paying less than they were in the past. So that has helped with that block of voters, which are often a majority of your voters.
These businesses are also bringing these people to the area too, correct?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It can be an important economic development generator, sure.
Boeing is certainly struggling right now, and the city of Everett is the home to the world's largest aerospace cluster, manufacturing cluster, and I've tried to explain to our members and to the community members that I've talked to about this, that despite the structural deficit that hits the news in Everett, that Everett is, because we are a built-out urban environment, we are actually an excellent partner for this type of model, particularly in a benefits charge environment. Because I would love to try to guide the city council to a decision on this, and do exactly what Councilmember Stonecipher is saying, and that is move the risk, move the cost onto the organizations and properties that produce the risk that cause Everett Fire to be the size and scale that it is, because we are asked to manage an enormous amount of industrial risk that is currently only paying a property tax rate for that service. And so I think there is an element of equity involved in that benefits charge, and I hope that at the end of the next meeting that we have reached a point where, after some internal deliberation, that we will agree to explore this further.
And we say businesses, but then again, I haven't been able to look at it. Karen has said that Snohomish County has limited pieces that can fall into our benefit charges compared to others, but it's not all businesses paying more either. It's like Chief and Councilman Stonecipher, it's risk. So we always say businesses, and the majority of businesses will probably see some increase, but it's not just business and residents, it's risk. And we probably should better change our messaging to risk and not risk. A good example is Chief talked about a ladder taking $1.6 million. If we had no businesses in our jurisdiction, if we only had single family houses, we would have no reason to need that $1.6 million ladder.
That's right. Councilmember Bader, any questions or thoughts about all this?
It doesn't seem like it's an insurmountable challenge for us. I think, as others have said, the big thing to explain is going to be explaining to people why we should do this, why leave the status quo. So, anyhow, that's going to be I think people always see risk when they leave the status quo, and
yeah,
even if they can intellectually see that maybe they're saving money, I think there's always in the back of their mind some reservation. Will that really come to pass? Mm-hmm. Especially when politicians are talking, right?
Have you thought about what might be, based on what you've learned in this process and from the other briefings? Can any of you think of things that you might, the arguments to say to voters, here's a good reason to seriously explore leaving the status quo from my perspective? That may be a hard question, but.
It is a hard question, but I think from my perspective, personally, again, yeah, having Everett Fire as part, or any fire department these days, as part of a city budget, it's not really a sustainable model for fire service. Just my opinion.
Well, at this point, there are only 2 left in the entire county, right? I believe it's Mukilteo and Everett, and everyone else is annexed into a fire district or an RFA, or is got a yeah. So nobody's running their own departments at this point as a city, because it is such a hit financially, and you have so many other jobs to do. Anybody think of any other reasons why it's worth moving from the status quo? Because I agree with Councilmember Bader and Councilmember Stonecipher that's something you're going to want to have an answer to at some point along the way. And I can think of several of them, but I'm more curious about what you guys see as maybe potential reasons that this is the right thing to further explore. No, or not.
Karen, there's a hand up from Whitney Mansfield.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. You're right. Hello, Whitney.
Yeah, that's okay. No problem. I see benefits. I see them. I live in the community as well as work in the organization. I see an opportunity for us to get a higher level of service at a lower cost, and that's just for our organization and for our community. And so those are the things that I look at. I'm not looking at that from a labor perspective, but from a community member perspective and from working in the department. I think those are typically the things that I look for at home is what is the service I'm getting and what is it costing me? And I think that we have an opportunity for those costs to go down and for that service to go up. So that's a win.
Thank you. So that if there's other thoughts on this, great. Otherwise, we can sort of segue on to our next steps as a group. So any additional comments on this whole financing discussion we've had and how we think about talking to our communities about this? It can be a challenging messaging issue, that's for sure. Let's see, I've got one. Whitney's hand is down now. Okay, Whitney can put his hand down. Thank you. So that will sort of take us right on then. Thank you, Chiefs, for all the work in putting together those scenarios and that presentation. That was super helpful. So that gets us down to our closing round table where after we hear from hopefully Whitney again and Jason with any other closing comments they have, I want to ask each of you on the planning committee whether you have the information that you will need to make a decision whether to proceed, or if there's anything in particular we should be bringing back next week in addition to the left liability, and we have a planned deeper dive on some of the capital and apparatus issues that we'll bring back as well. So that's where we're going to go next. So I'll ask Whitney if you would like to offer any additional comments at this point, and then Jason.
Yeah, I think it's been mentioned here a couple times that we would need to move forward and find more information out before we could really take a position on whether or not we were for or against developing the RFA. So I think as from the beginning, we're excited to explore those options and look at the different ideas and see what we can develop as a group.
Thank you, Whitney. Jason Brock, did you want to, on behalf of the IAF over on the Everett side of things, do you have anything you wanted to offer at this juncture? Jason, maybe he has had to step aside. You are on mute, Jason, if you're trying to share anything with us. Okay, well, then we'll come back around to the 6 committee members, unless the chiefs have anything they want to add here in this particular juncture, but we'll come back to you otherwise. So thinking about next meeting, so I guess it's sort of, we had sort of thought that in addition to next time being your last meeting, and wanted to make sure that we brought any information that we could to you at that meeting, we had been anticipating that you would then discuss where you were and make a recommendation as a committee, but it's entirely possible that you may want to go off and deliberate separately before you as a committee make that recommendation together. So if you have strong feelings one way or the other about that, like I'm going to need additional time with my friends before I make a statement about wanting to recommend as a planning committee that we proceed, let us know that, and we can try to figure out how we'd schedule that. But that would probably be a 5th meeting. And again, if there's any additional data needs that you have that you would like us to hunt down for you as part of next week's presentation. So it's sort of a bifurcated question.
Karen,
yeah, go ahead.
This is Cassie. I think for the city of Everett, you've got 3 of us, 2 of our 7-member council, and the decision of what we do next rests with the entire council, not just these 2 council members. No. So
no, I was just
need time for that no matter what, just for Council President Stonecipher and Council Member Bader to at least update the council, have a conversation, and recommend next steps either way, for then the council to kind of give them the nod to keep going.
Right. That's always been the assumption that would happen sometime after this exploratory phase. I think my question was, in particular, whether either the Board of Commissioners or the Everett representatives would like some time after next week before they have to make a decision at this table about whether you as a committee want to recommend proceeding, or whether you think we can do that next week as a committee, understanding that that's not binding on the Everett side. The Everett side will have to concur later in full. But it's a question of whether you think you will need more time to deliberate with, between Cassie and Brenda and Scott. You're going to want to go talk about this. You can do some of that before next week, but I guess I'll just leave it open. If you hear something at next week's meeting that really surprises the heck out of you, and you think I'm not ready to make a recommendation unless I have a little bit of offline time with my peers, I want to give you guys that space if you need it on either side of things here. So
I think for our part, we will need some time after next week before we can commit to going forward. However, so far, I'm positive about the whole thing. I would like to ask, is there anybody here today that has heard anything that would throw up a roadblock to moving forward after these 5 meetings? I know I'm not answering. That's not asking for a yes or no. Is there anything that they've heard so far that is a red flag?
I think if we felt we were unable to get a benefits charge approved, I'm not sure if it pencils out enough for me as an Everett council member to say we should move forward. But at least that's first blush.
Yeah, one question I have is we haven't looked at is really any information around like service levels, or what our response times, or what we think are what are the other benefits that are aside from financial benefits to this. I mean, are we thinking that we will be able to provide more robust call response or different types of services to our community that would be beneficial. We don't always look at those operational data points. I'm just curious if there's anything there.
Yeah, short sheets.
I would just say for Council President Stonecipher, the two models that we put up today are based on current operations. And so from the City of Everett side, we did not incorporate any significant changes to the services that we currently provide in the city limits. And the mayor has asked that we propose something that maintains the service level that we experience here in town. Which is not to say that there aren't benefits to the city by, for example, having a larger workforce overall. And then the question that will ultimately come back to you is exactly the one you just asked, and that is, do you want us to plan for improved services? And we can certainly sit down and have a conversation about what those might be, and what our strengths and what our weaknesses are here in the city of Everett. But that ultimately, if we choose to go forward with building something new, the question will come back to you in the form of, do you want additional services? And if so, exactly what would you like to do? So again, the authority lives with you, but the models that you saw today are based on, at least in Everett's case, maintaining the same service levels. And then as Whitney Mansfield mentioned, there does appear to improve service opportunities in Fire District 4 in a variety of different ways.
And I would say we're kind of the chicken and the egg. Like I said, we can't answer the questions until you guys get the details. You know, when we get a financial expert in here that can really help us dive in, we may be able to find one or two new positions besides the ones that we have to replace for Everett through efficiencies like we've talked about, through the IT that we pay for, the mechanics. But Chief DeMarco and I don't have the time or the expertise to go through and really get into the nuts and bolts of a financial plan to where we can ferret out one or two or three positions, and then where can we increase. So I think those questions are going to be really answered when we have somebody, Mr. Cushman or somebody else, come in and really start the financial, and then Chief DeMarco and I can work with that to say, okay, we have a little extra, we can put it here, we can put it there, and then come back to you and say, or if you want to increase it a little bit, we can do this other thing. But we're really just trying to work on what we have so that we're not making. I mean, we were reaching out quite a ways with some of the assumptions we made already, and so we were trying to not make even more assumptions about how do we increase service or move money from this area of the budgets that we have when we combine to this other area of personnel.
So I see, thank you, Chief. I see we have a question, hands up. I think Matt had his hand up first and Jason has his hands up. So Matt, did you have a comment?
Well, yeah, just a comment about the city council and their role in the city of Everett making a decision. And I just wanted to point out to the council members and the mayor that we do have an RFA item on the council agenda this next Wednesday. If you guys haven't seen the agenda already, just wanted to give you that heads up.
And all he's talking about is we have an agreement to share expenses for Karen Reed Consulting's services for these first 5 meetings. We've incurred just under $400 in additional legal fees over the course of this process, and the letter coming to you for amendment is just to agree to share those expenses as well.
Thank you, Chief. Jason, you had a comment?
Yeah, absolutely. It's more of a question I think would be directed towards the two chiefs. I just wanted to kind of inquire about one of the points of discussion was brought up about the level of service. As part of this process for moving forward with the RFA, how would a standard of cover be developed either individually or jointly between the two organizations prior to joining and becoming one?
Well, ultimately, a standard of cover would need to be developed for the new jurisdiction as a whole, and that's not to say that we couldn't. There's that cart is way down the road. But we can I think safely say at this point that that the new jurisdiction, should it form, would need its own standard of cover, and that the new board of governance would be responsible for determining the level of service that they want to provide in the different zones of the proposed jurisdiction.
Often the RFA plans say on day one, the standards of cover in place in the participating jurisdictions remains the same, and to give the board that time to develop a unified standard of cover. Whitney, your hand is up. I don't know if you have an extra comment or you just...
I have not an extra comment. I just have a question, actually, and I'm going to speak ignorantly as I typically do. But the question is, when we look at that estimated levy rate that the city of Everett would have to have now is $1.30, or roughly what it was, to support the fire department, that's estimated at what it would be. That money right now is going to the city budget. So when we talk about the cost it would take to develop this RFA, that money, to save the citizens of Everett money, would have to come out of the city budget. So those are the roadblocks that I think we would have to consider is, does the city want to maintain that level of budget that they have and relinquish the costs of the fire department? Or are they willing to give up some of that budget also that would fund the fire department? So I think that is going to be a huge question that we have moving forward.
That is right. I mean, that's sort of the irony is you get to the end of the planning process and your message to the community and your success is going to be largely based on what the city council projects it will do with its own levy. To sort of offset the RFA taxes, how will the city scale back its current expenses? And one of the challenges there is, of course, the city can take a resolution to commit it, but it can't actually bind a future council, and that commitment has to be made before the levy action is taken, typically. So the council would have to stand up probably. I mean, to be successful, for example, in the South County situation, the Linwood Council adopted a resolution saying that it was their intention to roll back city levies so that this was cost neutral to the taxpayers. And then they, in fact, did that, at least for the first year, cost neutral. The city of Arlington, when they just recently did their annexation into North County, they went through a long process to see, okay, what other needs do we have in the city that people are yelling and screaming that we need to fund? And so they basically made a commitment to the community and planned in their budget, but it hadn't actually been adopted by the time of the election, to roll back a large percentage of the costs out of their levy, but keep some proportion for other programs, public safety, transportation, other things that the city very much wanted to fund, that the community wanted. And they were very transparent with their community about that. But still, they were able to demonstrate, because of the way the taxes all were working up there, that a single family, the average, about half the single family homeowners would pay less into the annexation scenario, and half of them would pay a little or more. And that was their foot forward about that issue. But it's a really important issue that you'll have to go on. And this committee, of course, you will control the recommendations in the RFA plan, but you won't control what the city of Everett separately determines that it needs to do with its levy for its financial future. So are there any questions that we haven't covered, that other information that you would like us to bring back next week for you? All right. Sorry, go ahead. Commissioner Merritt?
Yeah. I was going to ask. We briefly had talked about governance, and you guys presented it to us. I was wondering if we could maybe both groups have individual conversations and then come together and say, hey, this is what we think it should look like versus this is what we think it should look like, and then have that. I mean, I would like to have that conversation sooner than later. So
yeah, so we hadn't anticipated trying to reach a recommendation on governance next week. I don't think that I would not recommend trying to get through to that level of ta-da in a week. I usually walk people through that in several steps to sort of build the common goals and values, and then explore different options that would meet those goals, and then talk about what you like and don't like about the models, and then eventually settle on a couple, and then send those forward for maybe there's one you prefer, but your second favorite is what. I always think people react better if there are options. And so you would not only stage the conversation into several pieces at this table, but probably also with the Everett Council and the Board of Commissioners. So you guys could have that time to separately discuss, okay, we've been talking about this, we've gotten this far, and we're looking at these options, what do you guys think? And then come back and make the final recommendation at this table that, again, would have to go back up to the full Everett Council and for your board separately to concur on.
And when would that take place, time-wise?
Well, we would start working on that immediately as part of the very first things that we work on in the next phase of work. It would be on every agenda for probably the next 5 agendas, and then we would hopefully have something done.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else, though? If you guys wanted to talk more about governance next week, we can certainly, we can have time to talk about whatever you want at our next meeting. I would not recommend trying to complete and finalize a recommendation on governance next week.
Karen, did we already, I'm sorry, my brain is mushy. Did we already go through the governance models of the other?
We did.
Okay.
We gave them that template that showed what the other RFAs have done. They're really all over the map, so the world is your oyster. There is so much flexibility in the statute. That's the joy of it. And also, like, it's really on you, yes, to pick something, and it based on what's important to you and why, and then how do we bring those things together in a governance structure. Are there any other data points that you thought you might have seen by now that you haven't, that we could try to pull together? We could try. Or do you think you have a good foundation to make this move forward or not decision?
Karen, can we help them nail down exactly what's going to happen next week? I think I'm sensing in the group a hesitancy to decide to move forward or not.
Yes, I am too.
Next week.
So,
and
Karen,
that's fine. Yeah.
Karen, I feel, and just talking to my commissioners, I feel like there's not going to be a decision to move forward by this group, that they're just going to leave and go to their individual groups and come back with an actual recommendation from either the council and my board for recommendation. I think you are wanting this group to recommend to the two things, and I think this is my feeling. My board, I know, wants just to go back and decide. They don't need to recommend themselves, and the feeling I get from Everett is Councilman Stonecipher and Bader just want to go and get a recommendation straight from the council instead of having kind of the intermediate step of this committee making a recommendation. Am I off any elected officials?
The only thing I would say is that to the extent we can tell them at Everett what both sides are thinking from this table, at least when we go back and ask them to make. I realize there's an asymmetry here between District 4 and the process that Everett will have to go through, but typically, and moving forward, as there are dozens of decisions that you will be making recommendations on. Again, the theory is that it's an iterative process, and you make the recommendation at this table. And we don't have to do that for this decision, but I would just say there's often value in knowing what this table thinks for the city council. Otherwise, they will be like guessing unless you guys tell them sooner.
So, Karen, I think we just took in a lot of information. That was it was a short but very dense presentation, and I, for one, have had a big week. and probably need a little bit of time to process before I can really say, this is what I need next week to make a decision. So I think if we just let us sit, and if we all promise to communicate to our chiefs as early as possible Monday, if there's anything else we need, that's probably the best you're going to get today, at least from me.
That's fine. If that works for folks, we can certainly make that work. So let's have that be the plan. And then we will also just have as a question mark a decision next Friday. I mean, the plan for next Friday originally was hear the respond to any questions, hear a final presentation on capital, the deeper dive on capital and facilities and apparatus. That shouldn't be too lengthy, and then decide if you want to make a recommendation out as a committee or not. And you could decide, as we were just talking, we don't want to make a decision as a committee right now. We want to go off and think about this, or and then maybe make a decision, or we'll just bypass that point. But as we go forward, if we go forward and build out the whole plan, I think the cadence is anticipated to be make recommendations at this table, take those back up for confirmation at the full council and the Board of Commissioners. Maybe that's not something that you want to do for this initial go, no go conversation. And even if you want to do it at this table, we don't have to do it at this table next Friday. You guys could go off, regroup as the 6 of you in separate pods, and then we could come back for a quick meeting 5, or just email back and forth. Yeah, we're good, or yeah, we're good. And that's the basis on which we're going to go forward to our councils. We can certainly do that. So we're flexible. So as I'm hearing it, then we'll let y'all contemplate all the data that we threw at you here today, and look back at what we've thrown at you in the prior 3 meetings, and let us know maybe by 3 o'clock on Monday. If you have any additional questions, just email your chief, and then they and all the rest of us will do our best to collectively answer those and get the packet out to you on Wednesday, as we have been targeting for the packets every Wednesday. And we will then just reconnoiter next Friday and decide what decisions you are comfortable making and what decisions you would like to defer, and that whatever your choice is perfectly fine. So that's what I've got for us today. I don't think there's nothing else on our agenda. So I would, unless anyone else has anything else they would like to chat about, or the chiefs have any remarks here that they'd like to add at this point. Chiefs, anything you want to add?
No, thanks for your patience. That was a dense presentation, and just a reminder, the paper version is in your packet. The recordings, Councilmember Stonecipher asked last time, the recordings of these meetings are available on the city's website immediately following the meeting. So if you needed to look at it again, you could do it that way. As are the digital packets for any of the community that might be following along. And the next meeting, most of the first 3 meetings was leading up to this meeting, and then the next meeting will really just be to sort of wrap it up, and then we will step away and deliberate internally about where we would like to go next.
So I think we can relinquish the floor here to Commissioner Schmoker to take us out of this, unless there are any last comments. Not seeing any.
Okay.
It's all yours, sir.
With that, then we will close our special meeting at 14:55 hours. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks all. We will see you next Friday.
Have a good week.